Podcasting from Portland East to Portland West, from Big Pine Key to Pacific Beach, and from San Juan to Guam, this is All Across America. Kristin, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
So, you're a co-founder of Mothers for Nuclear. You're a civil engineer at the Diablo Canyon power plant. How did you get into nuclear energy?
Oh my gosh, it's not something that like a lot of kids say to their parents, that they want to do when they grow up, right? It's usually firefighter, doctor. For me, I wanted to do something related to land conservation. I really grew up enjoying the outdoors and wanting to protect wild spaces for future generations. And I did a lot of backpacking and just had an appreciation that we have a beautiful, precious world around us, and we humans need to make sure we take action to preserve it, because when we don't, you see bad things happen. And people who maybe are careless with their natural resources, it takes a long time to get those back. Restoration projects are something you should not want to do. You should prevent the harm in the first place. And so I went into civil engineering in college. I actually, you're so young when you go to college and you're choosing what you want to do for the rest of your life. So I went in with an open mind. I wasn't sure, is this what I want to do? But I learned more about it. And I thought, yes, civil engineers are responsible for forming humanity's impact on our environment. And we can do that in a really thoughtful way, or we can do it in an unthoughtful way. And I wanted to be a civil engineer who is responsible for designing some of humanity's infrastructure in a way that's like the best use of our space, the most in harmony with nature, because I understand that we humans we're members on this planet. It's not just all here for our use and consumption, right? We have to be very balanced. And I did not dream of going into nuclear energy. I actually grew up thinking it was a bad thing. It just sounds like a bad thing, right? Did you ever watch The Simpsons?
Of course, yeah.
Well, like Homer wasn't exactly like a role model. So I just thought nuclear must be a bad thing. We talked about climate change a lot at home around the dinner table. I had a relative who was really into climate before it was popular, and he got our family talking about it and what we could possibly do. I remember talking a lot about grid capacity and new exciting solar projects, which are now, very old solar projects, but and talking about possible climate solutions. When I went to college, I learned a little more about how humanity gets our electricity. I don't think I really That's not like a required class in high school. You mostly just plug in your electronics and power comes out of the wall and your stuff works. Y you
Most
know?
adults even have no idea where we're getting electricity from.
So true. Yeah. And the limitations associated with each energy source, where each energy source is, what natural resources are required to make each energy source. Those are things I hadn't really explored before, but I dove into them a little bit in college and learned a little bit about the pros and cons of every energy source. And I went from being um, very anti-nuclear to being a little more curious about it. I ended up getting an internship at my local nuclear power plant. I went to college at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, which is close
Mm.
to Diablo Canyon, and I came out for a summer internship thinking I was going to find out all their dirty secrets, tell my friends, go back to school, finish my degree, and then go get a real job. And I ended up staying. I loved it so much. And not changing my mind right away, but just having access to the experts, and being able to put my eyes on the things I was skeptical about and afraid of and really learn how they worked like that. And then learning, like, for one, that Diablo Canyon, for example, is our largest source of clean energy in California. Like, that was a secret before. I never knew that. We didn't really talk about it. Like, there's a power plant there, it produces electricity, but, I mean, what a gem to be able to produce, over 8% of California's total electricity generation is on this one site that's about the land footprint of a football stadium. And when you think about the land requirements for other sources of electricity, for someone who's into land conservation, this was like that was a big wow for me. So I ended up, like, really feeling like, what I do every day is aligned with my values, and that really helps, getting out of bed every morning to come to work when you feel like what you're doing is a really good thing.
And a lot of people would say that that's almost would seem like an oxymoron that consider yourself a conservationist, but yet you work at a nuclear power plant.
Right. I would have challenged that as well earlier, just mostly because I didn't know much about electricity. Like I said before, where it comes from, the different options for us getting electricity, and what the environmental impact is. I mean, something I thought, excuse me, a lot about, when we were talking about my family was talking about climate and different energy sources is, learning that every energy source has life cycle carbon emissions. That really it helps your understanding that not one single energy source can be a silver bullet to the climate issue. Like, that we really do, for a lot of reasons, need a mix of different energy sources. Diversity is important. I mean, that's important in energy just like it is in our society, um, and something that can't be ignored because they all have pros and cons. Some energy sources, like, "Oh, we don't need fuel for solar and wind. We just need natural resources." That is so attractive to me, but we also need natural resources to build our ability to harness those natural
Right, that's
resources.
that life cycle that you're talking.
Yeah, right. And so, like, we, as responsible citizens of this earth, should want to minimize life cycle carbon emissions for every energy source that we use. Um, and learning that, fossil fuels emit their waste product into the very air that we breathe, and contributing to warming of our planet, well, that made me think about nuclear and its waste products a little bit differently because honestly, like, nuclear waste, that sounds so scary. Homer really did a number on me there. I saw all the barrels and the green oozing stuff on The
Right,
Simpsons, and
right,
I thought that's
and
what
the
it must be like.
yes, the three-eyed fish.
Blinky, yeah. Mhm.
So, walk us through, if you could, some of the other like, what are the main energy sources besides nuclear in the United States?
Well, fossil fuels, are a major energy source in the United States, specifically natural gas. We are, using coal less, and that is we're actively replacing coal generation mostly with natural gas, which is cleaner in terms of air pollution, but it has certainly has carbon, impacts um, that are something that when we look forward to a low carbon energy future, we do need to not put all our eggs in the natural gas basket. It is really attractive right now to build natural gas, I understand, because it's a really good balance to solar and wind, because they're intermittent sources of energy. Most people don't understand that the solar panels on their roof, even if their, meter says at the end of the year that they produced as much power as they used, if they're connected to the grid, they didn't actually use all of their electrons generated from their solar panels because we need to use energy almost at the moment it's created. And that's the beauty of the electric grid. It can move those electrons around our country so that we can put electrons on and take them off and keep a good balance and balance each other. We can send load to various places. It's a really interesting system, but it also means that when the sun goes down, we need something to replace that solar, and natural gas um, has been the way mostly that we in the United States have replaced that. Um, Lack of generation when the sun goes down or when the wind doesn't blow.
And so, yeah, I was looking up, I think natural gas is 40%, coal is about 15%.
Mhm.
And then renewables are another 20%, and then, of
And then
course,
nuclear.
nuclear. Yeah.
Yeah.
And, renewables, and a lot of people, think they're big umbrella of renewables, there are dams, hydroelectric power, which requires the damming of rivers.
Yeah. And for
Wh
someone who's interested in land conservation, I'm not about to go out there and advocate that we should dam more rivers.
Right,
So
right.
that's a huge environmental, issue. There are a lot of existing dams and resources that we've created, like at the dawn of the electric era, here in California, that we kinda came into electricity by damming rivers in the Sierra Nevada mountain range, and, um, and that was a wonderful step forward for humanity to start, building our economies, and, it's a quality of life issue when you have reliable electricity really is a big unlock for humanity. Um, but, some of that damage was done. Now, I think that we can use those existing resources well that we've inherited from the past, but there's not a lot of, it's like water something that, we can't just create more rivers here. In
Right.
California, we deal with droughts. There's not a lot of potential to build a lot more hydro capacity. So we really need to be looking at energy resources that are decoupled from our natural resources.
Yeah,
How can we get energy, without damming more rivers?
right. And so Diablo Canyon, what's the current status?
Diablo Canyon, we have 2 nuclear reactors here, and they are licensed to continue operating. They have an initial 40-year license, and that license, is up for both units this year in 2025. We've applied for continued operations with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and that's an additional 20 years.
Oh,
And
wow.
that's in process right now with, very good progress and on track to have license renewal until 2045. Now, the state of California has approved cost recovery for 5 years, so until 2030. So we need both things to be in place, for any energy resource to continue operating. They need whoever their regulator is, you need their approval, and then they also, from a business perspective, need to make sure that they're going to have customers for their power. So those are the 2 things that they're, making sure are in order for continued operations.
And so what do you mean about cost recovery?
California is, regulated. Our utilities are regulated by the California Public Utilities Commission, and so they oversee our energy resources and will approve or disapprove, our ability to recover in rates the cost of producing electricity at any given power plant.
I see. So in other words, being able to have a viable business model and make money.
Yeah, it's not a
Yeah.
charity. I think it
Uh,
is a humanitarian and environmental good,
yeah.
to operate a nuclear power plant, especially in this age, that we're in right now with reliable electricity being so important and low emission electricity, trying to get to a low carbon grid, very important. But at the end of the day, the people making that power need to make paychecks and,
Yeah.
um, yeah,
Fair enough. I mean, I think we live in such luxury in the United States that people don't understand there are many large parts of the world that have rolling blackouts that don't
yeah,
have continuous 24-hour power. And when, there's a grid failure or blackout that may happen, every couple of years, people are just don't know what to do with themselves. And I mean, I think
right,
nuclear and other, particularly natural gas, are kind of that backstop.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Having reliable electricity really it is the backbone of a modern economy. And so one of my hopes for humanity is that as we develop around the world, that we're able to provide that for more people. Because you see, when people have reliable electricity, their GDP goes up, and that really has an impact on everybody in the society, but mostly women, because women are the ones who are bearing the brunt of the manual labor a lot of times in the home that, prevents them from getting into the workforce and, being able to use their skills on some of their other talents besides, washing clothes and dishes by hand. Um, that's very time intensive when you don't have reliable electricity. You don't have the luxury of having that washing machine or even refrigerator. And that's a big time impact. That's a big, can be a big human health impact as well, especially for all of those people around the world who are cooking over open flame.
Right, right. So tell me about the founding of Mothers for Nuclear.
Yeah, Mothers for Nuclear was founded in 2016 with myself and co-founder Heather Hoff. We're both engineers who were skeptical of nuclear originally and changed our minds after a long process of questioning and realizing that nuclear energy aligns with our environmental and humanitarian values. And we thought that was um, something we wanted to share with more people like us because we found a lot of women and mothers specifically were anti-nuclear, but not all of them get the chance that we had to experience firsthand what goes on in a nuclear power plant and to get our questions answered by experts. And so we founded so that we could be a resource to them so that they could see someone like them. I have 3 children. I care very deeply about their health, their future, and I would never intentionally put them in harm's way. Yet I live, just a few miles as the crow flies from a nuclear power plant, and I've worked at one. And why would I do that, if I thought that was a bad thing for my family? And so just sharing that story, sharing the story of my experiences, it helps people, to have a place where they can bring their questions and feel heard and understood. And we've been able to point um, women and mothers and others, we say, because there's, of course, a lot of men interested in the topic too. But point them to good resources. We found it was really difficult to get good information. There's a lot of fear mongering out there. And it was very difficult to cut through all of that and get to the facts. So we want to help do that for other people.
Wow, that's great. And, so 9 years, I'm forgetting what year,
Yeah.
so wow. And so, what the detractors, what do they say that is wrong with nuclear power? What are some of those misconceptions?
Oh, there's so many misconceptions out there. I mean, you name it. Just I know for me, it was just completely misunderstanding what the technology was, how it worked, and what the real impacts were, and what the risk was. I guess getting clear for me on the relative risk of nuclear in context with other things that we accept in our lives, like getting in a car, um, and, breathing in the air, given the air quality around us, all sorts of risks that we are exposed to and that we take every day. What's the relative risk of nuclear? And when I dug into it, it was a lot different and lower than I originally thought it was. We hear a lot of people concerned about the waste, nuclear waste. It's something I was very concerned about for a long time and was actually like the last thing I really had to get my arms around before saying publicly that I support nuclear energy, because I don't wanna leave a hazardous waste product for future generations to deal with. I mean, who wants that? But when I learned what it really is, how we manage it, and, you know, what its potential is, um, I I got comfortable, a lot more comfortable with how we're managing it and comfortable with having this material here on Earth because I knew, what the trade-offs were. If we don't have nuclear energy, we're emitting it's usually fossil fuels that replace when an existing nuclear power plant closed down, we're replacing with fossil fuels. And the great thing about nuclear waste is that we can contain it. And we have technology to recycle it if we choose to do that. We can also use it in advanced reactors. It's very valuable material. Right now in the United States, we have a bit of a political stalemate where we're not making progress on what we're going to do with our waste in the future. But I learned that it's not as urgent of a problem as dealing with the climate crisis. I do have high hopes that um, we will take action on nuclear waste policy in the United States, and I'd like to see that sooner rather than later, of course, along with many other people. But I don't think that it's a singular hazard that means we should stop using nuclear altogether because we don't, we are not aligned as a country on a path forward. That just doesn't make sense. So, yeah, to go back to your question, I think nuclear waste is a big one we talk to a lot of people about, and I try to do it justice, in conversation, depending on what aspect a person's really concerned about. I find a lot of times, like, people's questions really are understandably, coming out of, like, deep-seated fears and emotion about the word nuclear, whether they grew up, hiding under their desks, um, during the Cold War era, doing another bomb scare drill, or whether, like me, they watch The Simpsons, or whether, like, my son's, classmates and the younger generation, like, they don't know much about it, but they're excited about learning possible solutions to the climate crisis. So they're, a little more open, and so I think, like, every person, their questions vary depending on their background and what they're interested in.
It was, interesting you talk about the nuclear waste aspect, and I guess the point of all this is that there's no perfect resource. There's no perfect way, and the population of the world is growing, and there is in the developing world, in the global South, as it's now known, there are so many people who are coming into the middle class that are gonna want all the trappings and deserve those trappings of air conditioning and refrigeration, and it's gonna require more energy.
Right.
And, humans, are resource intensive, and are going to require some sort of way to make our lives livable. And to me, my understanding and my sense after kind of digging into this is like nuclear is a great way to make it happen. It is not perfect, but it is less imperfect than a lot of the other resources.
Yeah, I think that's a great summary, Mark. I founded a group called Mothers for Nuclear, so it sounds like I'm you know, waving a banner for nuclear all day, but I understand I do a little bit. I mean, I really think it's a great technology, but I also understand it has its limitations and it's not the perfect solution everywhere for everyone. We really have to be thoughtful about our energy future, but it's not our energy future is just that. It's something that we need to be thoughtful about and really look at our options and the pros of cons of each and be able to make informed decisions because I've heard, you mentioned, just the growing need for electricity around the world. We have lots of new needs for it, here in the United States with electrification of the transportation sector and other sectors, which is very promising for us to take down our overall, carbon footprint as a society. But then there's plenty of people in the world who just want electricity, period. They're not even they wanna use more of it because they don't even have it at all. And we should want them to have electricity because I've heard it said that the dirtiest energy is having none. And why is that? Because when you don't have a source of reliable electricity or energy in general, you're gonna use what you have, which usually means burning stuff, and that has, devastating impacts on human health and on the environment. I mean, we clear cut a lot of forests back in the day when we were burning stuff as our main energy source.
Yes, fires are very romantic, except if you need to use them every single day for your cooking and heating and other needs, it's
Absolutely.
very different. And I mean, I'm just looking at the nuclear waste piece. I took an environmental studies class, and I took a lot of environmental studies. So I actually majored in environmental science and in
Oh,
English
great.
in college. And one of the it was an early environmental science class, and we went through an exercise of how do we tell future humans that if we are storing nuclear waste that it is toxic and radioactive and to stay away from it. And at that point, the Yucca Mountain thing was maybe in its embryonic stages. I guess it's still
Yeah.
around. That's in Nevada where they're trying to possibly store it. And so, that kind of stigmatized it for me in a way. But I compare it against coal ash, for instance, which is a byproduct of a coal fired power plant.
Right.
And listeners of this show will know that I had a giant pile of coal ash in my basement.
Wow.
and it is nasty, and it's just a byproduct of coal. It's like ash from a fireplace, and there was
Mhm.
a coal-fired furnace in my basement, and they would just shovel it into a pile, and I had to get rid of it, and I had the worst sinus infection of my entire life because it is highly, highly toxic, having worn a mask. So those piles are generated, and often they're generated next to, communities, often communities of color or disadvantaged communities, and it just blows around in the air and gets in people's lungs. Whereas the nuclear waste is very concentrated. I mean, how if you were to put it all together, I mean, how I mean, it could be stored in, I'd imagine, a stadium, something, there's not.
Yeah, again, football, soccer field size land footprint,
Right.
not what many might imagine. Just it's such a dense energy source, which is, um that's just part of its magic,
Yeah.
it's science, but it does seem fairly magical that we can split the atom and use the energy released in that process to make clean electricity. I mean, what an amazing reality that we're living in a day and age when we can do that, right? And because of all the power, the energy stored in those atomic bonds, we can use such a small amount of material to produce large amounts of energy for humanity. We don't have to use, square miles of land to do it for each power station. We can use a relatively small land footprint because that that material and the power in those atomic bonds is so energy dense.
And so maybe you could talk about. It's funny you say atomic bonds, and of course, I'm immediately thinking. I'm sure some of the listeners are like atomic bombs. So can you talk? What is the difference? And I think that's where I think a lot of the stigma that surrounds nuclear energy has come from. Is of course there's the weaponization aspect.
Mm.
And can you talk about how those processes are different?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the other maybe misconception about nuclear energy is that like a power plant is the same as a weapon or has the same potential for harm, and that's just not true. So the power that's or the material that's used in our commercial light water reactors here in the United States uses low enriched uranium. So it's actually a very small percent of your enriched uranium in the fuel that we use, whereas like weapons grade material is very, very highly enriched, and it's just completely different. There's no mechanism by which a power plant could act like a weapon
Gotcha.
given the fuel that we use.
And so Diablo Canyon is staying open. San Onofre closed, which was another power plant in Southern California.
Yeah.
And it was at one point slated to close. There'd be decommissioned Diablo Canyon. Is that was that the case? And now it's
Yes,
back.
that was the case. In 2016, the state of California, the owner-operator of Diablo Canyon, and various other groups all aligned that Diablo Canyon would close at the end of their initial operating licenses. So each unit would close in 2024 and 2025. And that was predicated on projections that we wouldn't need Diablo Canyon's electricity anymore, that the state would have developed other carbon-free energy resources
See.
to replace Diablo Canyon and, fill future need. Well, that just didn't happen. The spreadsheets didn't become reality, and, um, then we got within, 2 years, a year and a half of the, closure dates, and we had a turnaround, a change of opinion by the state of California, and since Diablo Canyon's such a well-run, well-maintained, well-operated station, they were able to, answer the call to the state of California and say, "Yes, we will change plans and stay open to make sure we keep the lights on in California.
Right, right. I mean, because that's the last thing that renewable energy future needs is over-reliance on it, and then, we don't have nuclear, and then all of a sudden the blame gets put on renewables that they weren't up to,
Yeah.
fulfilling the needs of the grid.
Yeah, which is a setup, you can't blame any one energy resource um, for the future state of our grid. There's a lot of planning that goes into it, and it takes the contributions of everything that we have to make it happen. Like we were talking about earlier, some energy resources work only certain types of the day or certain seasons. And the people who plan those energy resources need to make sure that we have enough diversity and excess capacity so that we can keep the lights on in any weather and any time of year.
So here's my concern with nuclear power, and for the existing plants, it makes perfect sense to me. I guess my concern is that I just don't see it being viable in terms of new generation generating stations. I saw the last plant that opened there was two reactors in Georgia, the Valgo
Mhm.
plant, and so there was number three and number four, and that was the first one in 10 years. I mean, essentially, there's been three or four new reactors in the last quarter century, if not longer. The average age of a nuclear power plant is over 40 years right now in the United States, so it's getting costlier and costlier to run them. Um, and I was listening to a podcast with one of these Silicon Valley, well-known names, titans, you could say, and he was talking about nuclear energy and how we should be building all these nuclear power plants, but had limited, I don't know, self-reflection, understanding, because a week or two later in the newspaper, this person lives in Atherton, California, and his wife had signed a letter discouraging affordable housing, and so
Mm.
this person who didn't really build physical objects as much as internet things in the cloud didn't quite understand the realities of dealing with municipalities and state and local and federal government. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, where are we headed?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think the future is wide open for nuclear. It's waiting to be written, and it could go a number of ways. I'm very hopeful that we will roll out the next generation of nuclear reactors here in the United States. This is starting to happen in the rest of the world. China is investing heavily and building quickly. The United Arab Emirates is building. We have the technology to build right now. But exactly what you mentioned, if we just do it as a first of a kind, sort of a major build and then stop, we're never going to develop the supply chains and the workforce that are needed. So we really need there's a couple of drivers, we need electricity demand, and that is coming with data centers and electric
AI.
vehicles. Like demand for electricity is increasing. And this is good because it's, at least in the case of electric vehicles, we're transferring our reliance on fossil fuels, putting them directly into our cars, taking that and, turning that into more demand for electricity, which we have the potential, to generate that electricity using clean forms. So we should be when we're looking to, um, provide this electricity for new demand, wouldn't it be great if we could do that as a society in a way that moves us off of fossil fuel dependence? And we can with nuclear. That's my hope. But we need a program to build out the new generation of nuclear plants. We can't just let Vogtle 3 and 4 in Georgia be the only ones and then say, "Oh, look, we did this first of a kind project and it went over budget, so we should never do it again." Look at any first of a kind project, anywhere, and you'll often find the same story. They have a big mountain to climb being the first one in a while to do something. They have a lot of lessons to learn. They have to develop the workforce out there by themselves. They have to develop the suppliers and supply chains. And once they do that, um, it would be a shame not to learn those lessons and capitalize on all the things that they built and put into place to keep building more.
So you're saying that one of the biggest problems was that it was essentially a one-off project, that they were almost
Exactly.
starting from scratch. I mean, this was built and it just went online last year, but it was, I guess, the last, we're talking the 1970s, which was kind of the heyday of building these nuclear power plants. So, I mean, they were starting from scratch. I mean, it was everything from square one.
Yeah, absolutely, and, a lot of I think the supply chain piece is really important too. The nuclear supply chain is being built up because of global demand, but
I see.
you know, I really want for us in the United States to not miss the boat on this one. We were the innovators, inventors of this technology initially. We should not cede our leadership to other countries.
Yes, I mean, that is one of the things about the podcast is American innovation, and so, we wanna be the innovators, and we've often been the land of, innovation, and I think in a lot of respects, nuclear is just one of many things where we're losing some ground, and I'd love to see us pick that back up. So what is the next generation of nuclear power? You mentioned China?
Yeah, China is building right now. It it's exciting to see some of the demand here, but we're not the first movers in this space. India is building, um, there's interest in Europe, but interest is building here in the United States quickly. Canada is looking at building small modular reactors, which is exciting, as well as refurbishing their existing fleet. I think really that's the first step too for us here in the United States. We are by far the largest, we have the largest fleet of commercial nuclear reactors here in the United States, by almost double of any other country. But it won't stay that way for long if we stay on our heels with building new technology and building new plants. Um, so, first step is to not close existing nuclear power plants. Um, these are assets that were built to last, and we invested a lot of money, a lot of capital in creating them, and the components inside can be replaced. You can change out valves, you can change out heat exchangers, when they reach the end of their service life, but the major structures and components are very, very long-lived, and nuclear power plants can go they have a 40-year initial operating license and then 20-year license renewals, so they could go 60 or 80 years.
Wow.
So we should use all of our existing resources that are well operated and well maintained. Those should keep operating. That's number 1. And then number 2, we have existing technology that can be built right now. And then in addition to that, we have just a whole exciting group of startup companies and new ventures that are looking to innovate different styles of reactors, with small reactors, modular reactors, micro reactors, and large reactors, different applications of the technology, again, that was US homegrown that we demonstrated in our national labs decades ago. But taking that technology from the national lab and commercializing it, we're being very thoughtful about it, but I'm excited to see some of those technologies be built and used to power humanity.
And that was one of the most surprising things about Chernobyl is that understanding that nuclear power plants like that were not built in the West, that didn't have a proper containment dome. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that were wrong with Chernobyl. It did not have a lot of the safety features that, a Western reactor would have. Just the design of the reactor itself would not ever be built, in the United States, and then, the operations, just a completely different, scenario. Also that, in Russia, using some of those reactors to make weapons grade materials, using some of those reactors for performing tests and experiments. Um, those are not things that you would walk into a nuclear power plant in the United States and see happening. We're very well regulated here.
What are your thoughts on nuclear fusion?
Nuclear fusion is a very exciting prospect, but when I started my career, in the early 2000s, I was told it was 20 years away, and here it's 20 years away, and I'm being told it's 20 years away,
That's
so
the old joke. It's always
yeah.
20 years away.
So my take on fusion and any other advanced technology is that we need to invest in it, and we're not ever going to see something become reality if we don't invest in the science. So I'm very pro, investment in our national labs and other programs that are going to help us just stay on the frontier of energy. Because what we have today is great, but it doesn't mean it's the very best. Like, we should keep finding out um, what else is possible.
So, for anybody listening that's considering a career in engineer energy production, what's your advice? What do you recommend?
Oh man, I know I should start thinking more about my advice because my kids are getting to the point where, well, they're getting to the point where my opinion doesn't matter to them anymore because they know everything. But,
Right.
if they were listening to me, I would say that, anything around nuclear energy or clean energy in general is very exciting, and lots of opportunities right now. So,
Excellent. Anything you want to leave us with? Any final thoughts?
no, this has been great. I really appreciate it.
All
It was a
right.
fun conversation.
And how can people find out more about Mothers for Nuclear?
We have a website, mothersfornuclear.org. You can reach out to us there or on social media. We have the standard Facebook, Instagram, X, and all that.
All that. All right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Kristen. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
All Across America is produced by me, Marco Vig, in Ridgefield, Connecticut. Visit us on Instagram at All Across America. Check out our website, allacrossamerica.com. There's an interactive map with all our episodes, and there's a Contact Us page where you can send your reactions, guest ideas, and suggestions. So get in touch, stay connected. To me, that's what podcasting is all about. Thanks for listening.